Chair, I would like to reintroduce Associate Professor Dr Andy Schmulow.
Thank you. Before I ask my question, Ms George, I just point out to you that in the event that AMP is a defendant in litigation brought by, for example, ASIC, you would be the beneficiary of model litigant litigation. You should consider the ethical implications of giving back that which you receive. Mr Hirst, you said in your answer to the question about political interference that you donate money to charities and other organisations. I can't quite remember whether you used the term organisations or entities, but for the purposes of my question, it's a distinction without a difference. Do those other organisations include the Financial Services Council or the Australian Bankers Association or any other entity that is well known as a lobbyist, prowling the halls of federal parliament and suborning our democracy?
Well, clearly we're a member of the Australian Banking Association, so we pay membership fees.
And they're a lobbyist?
Well, no, we have our own people who look after our interests.
You didn't mention that in your answer, though. You said you make donations to charities and other organisations. You didn't mention that you directly lobby.
Well, it wasn't a question about whether or not I lobby. It was a question about whether or not money was paid to political organisations and what donations were made to the community and, you know, how that occurred. So lobbying was never a part of the question, which is why it wasn't mentioned.
Okay, well, I'm asking you now, do you lobby politicians?
We do. Of course we do. I mean, there's legislation changes all the time. If you have a think about the inquiry that the government's having into small banks, we'd be derelict in our duty if we didn't talk to politicians about what the outcome of that may or may not be. You can't operate in a vacuum from the people who are making the laws of the country. That'd be silly.
And that vacuum would include the Australian Bankers Association undermining the Financial Accountability Regime Act to ensure that members who are deemed responsible persons under Section 21 of the Act, that a breach of Section 21 of the Act cannot be brought against an individual. That was at the behest of the Australian Bankers Association and reported in the Sydney Morning Herald. I put it to you that that suborns democracy, undermines the findings of the Hayne Royal Commission, and is antithetical to the principles of executive accountability.
Well, I'm not familiar with the exact example that you're talking about, but I think the Australian Banking Association is quite entitled to make representations on behalf of their members like any other member of the community is. And that's what a democracy is. It's a contest of ideas. It's people working together to get to the best framework and legislation that they can for the community. It's silly to think it should be one-sided either way.
No, Mr Hirst. Democracy is the right of the majority to govern and the right of the minority to be heard.
Yeah, but it also includes input from everybody. That's what it's about. That's why we have a free country. So
this was undermining federal legislation which had been amended so that Section 21, I'm sure Mr Cullen will advise you on the contents of Section 21 of the Financial Accountability Regime Act. I'm sure he's across it. I'm sure he's across the provisions of Section 83, subsection 3, note 2 of that same legislation, and the fact that it makes Section 21 null and void.
Well, I think that's your opinion. You're telling me the Australian Banking Association has a different opinion. Let the best opinion work.
Mr Hirst.
Pardon?
This was reported in the Sydney Morning Herald, Mr Hirst, and the Treasurer didn't deny the allegations.
Well, I fail to see what you're trying to achieve here.
What I'm trying to achieve is to understand the extent to which this firm uses shareholders' funds to suborn democracy.
We don't.
But you said you lobby.
We lobby. We talk to politicians, we talk to the community, we talk to everybody so that we can make fair representations to help build our economy and develop. I mean, I don't really understand how you think it works.
How I think it works? I know how it works, but how I think it should not work is when you're not lobbying politicians to build our economy, lobbying politicians to ensure you enjoy no personal accountability if you turn a blind eye to fraud and theft, of which there is a long history in this firm.
Well,
charging fees to the dead?
well, I think that all that was tested through the Royal Commission and then it went to court, so there's a long
So we're in agreement.
record of...
It was proven at the Royal Commission.
There's a long record of what went on there and the processes that failed through that issue. It wasn't a, you know, we're going to sit down and deliberately do this. There were failed processes, and the majority of the things that were uncovered at the Royal Commission were around failed processes. There was a minority of things that were discovered that were poor policy.
Hirst? No, Mr. Hirst. There's evidence at the Royal Commission by Mr. Jack Reagan that AMP lied to the regulator so many times that it lost count. Please don't diminish the poor conduct, the misconduct and the illegality that your firm engaged in the past. It's on the public record. To attempt to do so is pointless.
I didn't...
I'll move on to my next question.
Well, that'd be good.
I take you back to a rather unfortunate set of circumstances which took place when you were on the board, and I'm interested to know what steps you have taken to reform AMP's culture. I refer to the rather unfortunate business with Mr. Bo Pahari, an alleged serial sexual predator who was sacked from this firm with a $50 million handshake. You will recall that because you were on the board.
Actually, I wasn't, but
You
anyway.
were appointed in July 2021.
That's
He
right.
was removed in August 2021.
Yeah, it all happened before I got there.
He was removed after you joined the board.
Yeah, but all those decisions, discussions, etc., happened before I got there.
Okay. What steps have you taken to ensure that the next sexual predator who prowls the halls and the corridors of your organisation does not A, appoint himself as chair of the Inclusion and Diversity Committee, like Mr. Pahari did, the irony is withering, and that if he has to be sacked for being a serial sexual predator, that there are provisions in the contract to ensure that behaviour that is contra bono mores does not result in a $50 million handshake.
So all these allegations that you're putting, one I'd be a bit careful about.
They're on the public record.
Well, I don't think it says anything about him being a sexual predator, does it?
He was disciplined by AMP for sexual harassment. That was reported in the ABC.
Right. Well, that happened prior to my time, as I said. It's very clear that sort of, or any sort of behaviour, and I'm not saying whether I behaved like that or he didn't because I wasn't there and I have never read any reports and I don't know anything about it personally. That sort of behaviour is unwarranted, wouldn't be tolerated, is illegal, whatever.
Sure that somebody who behaves that way and has to be dismissed cannot be dismissed with a payout, that your contracts specify that if you engage in behaviour that is contra bono mores, that you will not be given a payout if you have to be dismissed.
Well, you seem to know more about his contract than I do, but...
I'm not even a director.
Can I finish the question? So, yes, we certainly would not allow anyone who'd done anything illegal to walk away with a payout.
Good to hear.
Thank you.
Authorised by Craig Isherwood, Citizens Party, Melbourne.